welcome to the chorus in the chaos Thanksgiving extravaganza. My name is Jack, and I'm joined with my good friend Blake, and he is giving us all a history lesson on the background of Thanksgiving. If you missed the first episode, you should go back and listen to it, because otherwise you're not going to know what continent you're on, right?
Yeah, all the things leading up to what we know as the Pilgrims. Not all the things, but a lot of the things that lead up, that'll give you the most kind of context to this episode.
Yep. So please go back and listen to that one. Otherwise, if you've already listened, I'm gonna Blake pick it up. Tell us about the Pilgrims.
Yeah, welcome. So the Pilgrims, as we mentioned at the end of last episode, I'll just give a brief little point here. The Pilgrims are folks that we typically refer to. They are separatists that want to separate themselves from the Church of England. There are lots of separatists at this time that we're talking about in the reign of King James, but not all of the separatists are pilgrims. Pilgrims are a specific group of people that we refer to that go from England to Holland, and we'll talk about that whole movement, and then from Holland to what is now the United States, founding Plymouth and all of those good things. So we're talking about some distinctive groups here, and we want to keep them separate, though they believe much of the same things. Now, there are some major events that lead up to the Pilgrims, everything we talked about in the last episode. But what happens under King James is there begins to be the formation of many separatist congregations, those who do not fit cleanly into the Church of England. And so these separatist groups, they begin forming in places like Nottinghamshire and Lincolnshire and Yorkshire and all of the other shires, the Hobbitshire, and they begin meeting secretly together. There's leaders, and again, we don't have time to get into all of these guys, but names that you might be familiar with: John Smith, Richard Clifton, John Robinson, William Brewster, all of these characters that will keep popping up in this narrative. Essentially, they reject the Church of England as corrupt, and they refuse to conform. They do not like the way that worship is being done. They do not like that the king is still functioning as the head of the church. Just a more British pope is really what they ended up with. And so persecution with these separatist groups, against these separatist groups rather, began to intensify under James I.
So did you know John Smith, many people consider him the first Baptist?
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't a joke. Like a lot of people do.
Right.
And it sounded like a joke, but it wasn't.
I was waiting.
Or John Smythe, John Smith,
the
first Baptist leader. He was one of the first Anabaptists, the first to reject infant baptism. And that's a little side note. He got run out of England and went to Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And
so makes him unlikable for many reasons, doesn't it? Yeah, right. Get out of here. We don't want this guy. Yeah. And so again, lots of different things taking place there. The decision to flee England for greater religious freedom. Again, this is not unique just to our set of pilgrims that we'll be talking about. There were several groups of separatists that desired to have a greater freedom. Again, the overwhelming desire to inform and function to be as the primitive church was. So that when you would look at the Bible and you would see, well, what was the structure and how was the worship and what were all the things? That's what they wanted essentially to regain. They wanted to shed off all of these extra things, at least what they viewed as extra, that had come up and come about. So the Scrooby congregation decides that it is impossible to practice their faith freely in England. And so they choose to flee to the Netherlands, which is known for, at the time, its religious tolerance. There's all kinds of, in these different like escape attempts, okay, to get out of England, because you're not allowed to just say, hey, King, we disagree with you and we're just going to leave the country. Will you, sign our passports? It doesn't work like that. And so there are several attempts. It's actually illegal to flee to another country. And so several attempts are made Bradford talks about these in Of Plymouth Plantation. He talks extensively about their foiled attempts. Everything from betrayal, where they would hire a ship that was supposed to carry them to Holland, but then the captain would betray them, take all of their goods and then have, soldiers come on board and arrest everybody. And the men would be imprisoned and the women and children would be detained. And, at times, these men that were arrested, that they were being held for like 7 months, so this wasn't a, book them and turn them loose kind of gig. So eventually, they're arrested and they're released. They're betrayed and they're arrested and they're released. And all of these different events are taking place. This puts them under basically being heavily monitored because they're trying to leave, and you have a few hundred people trying to escape. It becomes kind of a game of cat and mouse. Can we escape without being caught? In 1608, they decide that they're going to hire a Dutch captain. Okay. The English captains that they had hired, it either didn't work out or they had betrayed them. And so they figured a Dutch captain is going to give them a better chance of not being betrayed. There's a particularly good portion of Plymouth Plantation that, again, and if you're an American, especially, and you're a Christian, you should read Of Plymouth Plantation. I mean, it is a part not only of your country's history and your cultural history, but it's part of your religious history as well. And so it's kind of a triangulation of things that you definitely should be well acquainted with. As Bradford talks about this event with this Dutch captain, they had been so betrayed and sold down the river that admittedly they're nervous about the proceedings of meeting with this captain. And so everyone, and this is a oversimplification of the event, everyone's lined up on shore. They decide, well, we don't want to send all of our goods to the ship because what if the captain just takes off and leaves us and takes all of our goods? We don't want to send the women and children first because something bad could happen then too. So what they decide is to load up most of the men. So they're going to leave a few men on shore. They're going to load up most of the men, and then the men will receive the goods on the ship, and then the women and children will be brought aboard. And of course, this is all done by a small ferrying boat.
Do you know what they called the goods?
What?
Scrooby snacks. Because it's the Scrooby congregation.
That's good. All right. Yeah.
All right.
Credit where credit is due.
All right. That's what I'm here for. That's my contribution, folks.
Yeah. So what happens is kind of a series of events. So there is a shift in the weather, and that transport ship. So the men get loaded up, but when the goods boat is coming back across, it catches up on a sandbar. While that is happening, the Dutch captain and sailors observe that there is a team of soldiers on horses coming down the shoreline because the countryside has turned out to arrest them, basically. The Dutch captain has no option but to, because now he's in trouble for ferrying people he's not supposed to be, to pull up the anchor and sail away. The way that Bradford describes this parting of the ship sailing away, children clinging to their mothers, wives and mothers wailing, and men crying and shouting from the ship as it's being pulled away, that separation is utterly heartbreaking. Furthermore, on that sailing vessel, as they're heading to Holland, they hit a huge storm, and this is something else that Bradford talks about. And he says that the storm is so severe that the sailors are like crying out that they're going to die. I mean, it's very reminiscent of Jonah. And Jonah's, when you're in bad shape when the sailors are losing it,
Right.
like
Yeah.
we're going to die here. You never want to hear the sailors say that, And so Bradford says that the sailors, it's almost in response that the sailors cry out, we're going to die. We're taking on water. while the separatist men are crying out, "Yet, Lord, you can save. Yet, Lord, you can save." And Bradford says they're shouting this as salt water fills their mouths and ears. So this is an intense storm, and almost miraculously, in this event, the storm dies down. And the men and the sailors make it to Holland. And the storm is so bad that there was actually people, apparently, that had come out to the docks because they were shocked that a ship was actually coming through that storm. Like, they would have thought like this thing would have been utterly destroyed and wrecked. So now now back in England, there is a bit of chaos going on at the downtown at the jailhouse. You now have hundreds of women and children, which under any political regime, it does not look good to imprison women and children whose only crime really is following their husbands. They have nowhere to go back to. They've sold their homes. I mean, this was the last, ditch effort. So they are utterly displaced. They have nowhere to go. They have nothing to their name. Their husbands are now gone. And so this puts, again, this kind of puts them in the government, I guess, if you will, between a rock and a hard place. These women and children are essentially quickly released with a blind eye turned that says, just go. For James at this point, especially, he cannot give an official, yes, you're free to go, but all historical accounts reveal that he wants them gone. They are a pain in the rear end. They are taking up way more manpower and more focus than they should. They've got other things that they need to deal with. And so through a series of events, the women and children make it also to Holland. Now, so many things in the Pilgrim's journey are so providential, because you have to ask, well, what if the women and children and all the goods had made it on the ship? Would they have survived the storm that they were up against, that they had to sail through? Or would the boat have capsized with all the additional goods and weight of people and all of these different things? And there's so many stories like that it seems like a disaster gives way actually to the what ultimately becomes the better thing. So they land. They finally succeed in making it to Amsterdam. They decide pretty quickly that Amsterdam is not the place to be. There's already some separatists that have left England, and they're there. And there are two separatist congregations in Amsterdam, and they're already fighting with each other. So the Leiden congregation says, well, we're out of here, what becomes known as the Leiden congregation. So they take off to a separate place, and that congregation grows under a pastor named John Robinson. John Robinson is he's a boss. He is, when you read about him, you're like, that's a good pastor. You can just tell. He loves his people. He loves God. He's so wise in his decision making, at least from the accounts and things that we have. Really an incredible guy. Now, kind of fast forwarding through things, the life in Leiden. So the Pilgrims are in Holland for a total of 11 years. Okay. In this 11-year period, there's a little bit of debate. So a lot of revisionist history says that basically the Dutch could not wait for them to leave at the end of 11 years. But if you hear other more contemporary accounts, they were very much loved by the Dutch people. In fact, one of the last things is they are just saying we're leaving here and we're going to the New World, that there were large financial offers made from many wealthy Dutchmen for them to stay. Now, there's a couple of things that went into play here. As they are living in Leiden, they don't the economy in Holland is largely seafaring and trade. The Pilgrims have experience with neither of these things. So they end up taking jobs that make it so that they can barely eke out a living. Bradford mentions that their children, 6, 7-year-old children, are working 11-hour days to help support the families. And he mentions that the hard labor of the time was basically nipping the youth in its bud. I mean, it was just that these kids were just broken. I mean, just from hard labor as children. As the years progress, concerns begin to grow for this congregation of believers. First off, there is that economic hardship. I mean, it's just mostly very heavy labor jobs that they're under. Secondly, they are disturbed at their children adopting Dutch customs. And I would think a top 5 fear for me would be that my children would take on Dutch customs. Jack would probably agree with that.
I'm curious.
Right.
Like, I'm genuinely curious. What were they like?
Yeah.
What Dutch customs were they? You may not.
So
know
they're
the answer
afraid
to
of
that,
them losing their English identity. So this kind of came in 2 prongs. It was in like worldliness and like just the way of thinking. Like the Dutch people, they prioritized things differently than Englishmen did. And much of what they did, the Englishmen viewed as, well, the Puritans specifically, or not the Puritans, the Separatists and the Pilgrims, they viewed it as worldly. In fact, as some of their like children were growing, they started taking on what they considered worldly careers, which specifically was military and like sailors, like ocean, kind of things.
were a lot of the Separatists pacifist?
So they were losing. I don't think so.
Okay, just curious.
I don't think so. I don't remember reading that.
Listener, if you happen to know,
so. I mean, no. I mean, because they're ready. Because when they go over, and meet with, like, when they have their agreement with the Massasoit, I mean, part of that is a war agreement. Like, if you get in trouble, we'll go to war.
Yeah, I guess that's
you,
a good point.
And you go with me. I don't know. So maybe the listener can drop some knowledge on us there. Yeah. But anyway, some of their children are growing up. Again, 11-year period. They're growing up and they're taking on kind of Dutch identity because they're growing up in that area. They're taking on Dutch jobs, Dutch ethics, I guess, and things like that. And so they're disturbed by that. And then on top of all of that, so the economic hardship, they're losing their children is what they kind of view that. There's also the threat of war. So in this time period, the Spanish, which is the Spaniards are very Catholic still. Them and the Netherlands, Spain and the Netherlands, a truce that they had was coming to an end. And so there's this threat of, great, here come the Catholics again. Like it's inevitable. We're going to be up against these Catholics again, and we don't want this. So they have a couple of options. As the congregation, the men meet together, they decide we need to get out of here, and we have 1 of 2 places we can go. Number 1, we could go to Virginia. We've heard good things about Virginia, but there's pros and cons to Virginia. Or we could go to Guyana, which is a country in the northern part of South America. Now, you couldn't think of 2 more like diametrically opposed places.
It is like a weird thing. Like, we got 2 options, guys.
2 options, 2 options only. We're either going to Virginia or a tropical paradise. Yeah. So they begin weighing the pros and cons. Okay. And there are legitimate pros and cons. So pros for Virginia: should they need help is available. Okay. There's already like the Jamestown settlement. There's already ships going back and forth. England is not so far away that they would be without help should they need some help. Okay, so that's a pro. There's also the pro, again, that they believe that they will be able to maintain their English culture and have the religious freedom that they want. Now, there is still a little bit of threat from the Spaniards in ships that are going up and down and territories that Spain is still holding north of the Hudson River and all of that stuff, or north of where there's, where they end up landing. Now, Guyana is another option. Pros for Guyana is all of the reports have been from there year-round growing season. So all of the food that you could want all of the time, that the weather is beautiful, and that it is far enough removed that you're probably not going to have any problems with the Spaniards. But here's the problem. The diseases in tropical climate, which they were aware of, then Bradford even says that those kinds of climate lend themselves to horrific, I think he says, I'm trying to remember exactly what he says. Something about like diseases and critters. So it's like, look, guys, we could go to Guyana. There's year-round growing, but the spiders are massive. So it's like the bugs, the diseases, the things like that. And then ultimately they said, if we need help down there, we're not getting help.
Yeah.
Like if there's a disaster, I mean, there's not going to be ships coming regularly. Ultimately, they're still not totally rid of Spain, the threat of Spain, because their whole thought is that even if we are a large success down there, we'll have Spain knocking on our doorstep, and we probably won't have the help from England that we would if we were in Virginia. So ultimately, they land on, we're going to the US of A, baby, which is,
woo!
Woo!
Let's go. Yeah.
Eagles screeching, fireworks going off, V8 engines, all the things. So, so they decide that, that's where they're going to go. So they decide we're going to America. 1617 is kind of when they make this decision. So the congregation leaders, they formally decide to migrate to the New World, and this is going to be their best option. They want to remain English. This is like their big bullet point goals. They want to remain English. They want to avoid persecution, and they want to create a community built on their religious convictions. So if we can keep those three things, that's what they want to do. So they're in Holland, and they decide, hey, for King James, this is like a crazy X showing up. Okay. So it's been 11 years and here they come again. And I think they sent, I'm trying to remember, I think they send William Brewster, who actually gets in trouble because he is sending basically anti-Church of England pamphlets, smuggling them into England while asking for permission to leave. So it's like, okay, you can't just be chill until we get permission. So they seek permission from King James. Can we, under religious conviction, can we have a patent permission to go and have a settlement, begin a settlement? We'll be under, English, authority and everything over there. Permission to settle in that area. And he says, no, you can't. You cannot do it under just religious purposes. And so through this long series of events, they begin seeking a patent with the Virginia Company because they want to be Virginia territory. Now, there's all kinds of things that come along with this, okay? That now this is becoming, if they're going to get permission, it's not solely a religious venture, which is their primary goal. There is a necessity of a financial venture that has to go along with this. Because if you're going to get permission, you need to be turning out some money for the sponsoring company, I guess is one way to put it. So they do kind of receive, when they decide to start seeking permission from like the Virginia Company, they don't receive explicit approval from James, but he doesn't forbid it either. Again, it's kind of that turning the blind eye, because it's easier if these people are gone. It's easier if they're no longer sending pamphlets about against the Church of England and things like that, hidden in pickle barrels, I think is what they were doing. But anyway, so they kind of interpret the ambiguity as permission to proceed. So that's what they do. They begin proceeding, and they begin negotiations with the Virginia Company in 1618 and 1619. Ultimately, and you probably know this if you're a listener and you know any of the history of this at all, ultimately they go through tons of work, tons of hardship to secure this patent with the Virginia Company that they don't even end up using. Bradford has a really interesting thing to say about this, about the things that men toil for, the things that make sense to men that so often fail. He put this whole this whole thing with the Virginia Company in that category, that they were trying to go about this man's way and God had other plans for them. So they begin negotiations on this land patent in the Virginia Company of London, and the company agrees to grant them land near the mouth of the Hudson River, which is in present-day New York. They also negotiate financing with some English merchants, particularly a man named Thomas Weston of the Merchant Adventurers. We don't have a lot of time to go into Thomas Weston, but Thomas Weston is the perfect villain. The guy is a scumbag, a historical scumbag. He again and again and again messes over the Pilgrims. I mean, he changes the terms of their agreements. He makes promises he doesn't keep. At one point, I mean, this is like way in the future. Weston comes over to the settlement under the guise of a blacksmith, and he's going to start his own settlement, which fails almost immediately. And he comes staggering into their camp. He has a satchel, and that's it. And he's begging them for beaver pelts. Now, he has already not met his promises to them again and again and again and again. They had every right to say, get out of here. We don't want to see you again. We don't want anything to do with you. He had already written them off in a letter, essentially saying, I'm glad to be rid of you, I think is how he signed it off when he ended his contract with them. But he comes staggering into their town, their settlement, begging for beaver pelts. I'll pay it back and all this different stuff. And the Pilgrims give him these beaver pelts. This is way down the road. He goes and he sells those pelts. He never pays them back. He never meets the agreement. And they experience personal hardship by the grace that they show this man again and again and again and again. It's really incredible. And for all of the, sometimes the Pilgrims, and especially the Puritans, and the Pilgrims and Puritans, especially in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, they're not the same group. And I realize that. But sometimes we look at the Pilgrims and we think, well, this is just a stern, cold, heartless group of people. I mean, that's kind of the cultural perception of them. But it's just not true. In every corner, every turn, they were seeking to show as much grace and mercy as they could, even when probably they should have said, no, too many lines have been crossed. And this happens again with multiple, when the new settlers come in and things like that. Anyway, back on the shores of England. So they begin arranging finances and logistics and all that stuff. Again, the merchant adventurers decide to take them on, and they say, well, we will exchange, we'll finance the trip in exchange for future profits. This is called a joint stock venture. All right, a joint stock venture. We'll fund the trip. You're going to be paying us over a period of, for them, it was going to be 7 years. So the Pilgrims had to provide labor and share profits for 7 years with the company. Now, in this whole process, all of these tensions begin rising because the Pilgrims ultimately are not the only group wanting to go over. There is another group that are not religious zealots that are referred to as the strangers, and they actually outnumber the Pilgrims. These are people looking to make a buck. These are guys looking for adventure. These are your classic people that just want to kind of run away with the wind. And so you have kind of a profit mindseted group of people, and then you have a group of people that are more interested in the religious freedoms and things like that. So before they even leave shore, tensions are kind of stirring and kicking around with these two groups, one with religious goals, one with financial goals. But finally, an agreement is made. Thomas Weston tries to change the agreement like a couple days before they depart. It had to do with the ownership of the houses, that they would build, like, after the 7 years, who gets the houses? I mean, imagine you plant a new settlement and you have to work for these people for 7 years, and the guy tries to change your contract that you lose your houses at the end of it. It's just crazy. Anyway, Scumbag Weston. I wonder, maybe he was the inspiration for C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. Like, I need a real dirt bag. Yeah,
that's a good thought.
Weston. Yeah, Weston. That's a good idea. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry if your name is Weston, by the way. Not that I apologize. I'm sorry that your name is Weston. So anyway, the Pilgrims. So the Pilgrims go to depart Holland, and John Robinson and about 400 other separatists. They have this emotional parting. They send them away to England, and some of them know that they will never see each other again this side of heaven. Ultimately, many of those 400 plan, at least, on slowly trickling over once the plantation is set and the settlement is made. But Robinson gives this really moving and beautiful kind of departure prayer and sermon that is recorded for us from Bradford, and I would highly recommend checking that out. Again, it just speaks to his pastoral heart for his people. That would be the last time that John Robinson would see those groups. He intended to make it over, and he didn't. He ultimately decided that the better thing was to stay behind and to minister to the congregation that was left behind there. So the procurement of the ships. This is a whole thing in and of itself. So the spring, kind of summer of 1620, they're working with the merchant adventurers. And what is secured for them is 2 ships. Now, most people know about one ship. They know about the Mayflower, but not many people know about the Speedwell. The Speedwell. I should say this. The Mayflower is a ship that's about 100 feet long. Okay, which if you go online, you can look. There is a ship called the Mayflower 2, which is a reproduction of the original Mayflower, same dimensions and all of that good stuff. It was restored. I think it was built in the 50s, and then it was restored in like 2019 or 2020 or something like that. The thing that stands out to me, and I am not a seafaring individual. In fact, I'm one of those people that my worst fear is like deep ocean where you can't see land. I never want to be in that position at all. All right. But when you look at the size of the ship, and so particularly the Mayflower 2 with like normal boats around it in the harbor, the thing that stands out to me is how small this ship is. We're not talking about the Titanic here. Maybe that's a bad example, but we're not talking about, a cruise ship. All right. We're talking about a small ship. The Speedwell is half the size of the Mayflower. The Speedwell is only 50 feet long. Now, the Speedwell is purchased in Holland, and it brings the congregation to England. And then it sails from the Netherlands to Southampton, where they're going to meet up and they're going to get the Mayflower also. So the investors, there's people in all of this. You talk about the difficulty. If you've ever had to finance a big project, or if you've ever had to work with different companies to come in and support a different project, the thing about people pulling funding, that was happening here too.
Hmm.
So up until the day that the Pilgrims leave, there are people pulling funding from them. Because I mean, there were people that pulled funding because they were going to Virginia instead of Guyana. And so it was like, well, you're not going where we want you to go. So we're pulling the funding for the adventure. There were people that were upset about the contracts. And so, they would just pull funding and this and that. So there was so much insecurity, even up to the day that they're, supposed to depart. So the investors hire the Mayflower, which is this larger English cargo vessel that we know and are familiar with, to carry most of the passengers and most of the supplies. Final preparations are made in England. This is July, August 1620. Both ships meet at Southampton. They finalize supplies. They sign financial agreements. They prepare the company lists. They check everything they're supposed to. And then there's delays. There is delays over negotiations. Disputes begin to occur with the merchant adventurers. Again, some of them pull funding, others back out. The Pilgrims, to even fund the departure, have to sell a bunch of items that they have that are necessary, like things that they have packed that they're going to need. And so they end up selling I think the two big things were butter and beer. Butter and beer were like the two things that they ended up selling to fund the trip. And they're like, we don't have to have these things, though they certainly would be nice once we got over on the other side. And so they sell a bunch of that. Immediately, a bunch of repairs have to be made. Now, you talk about things that you don't want. Having to repair a leaky ship before you're about to cross the Atlantic. What does that do for your confidence?
Yeah,
so
like buying
repairs
an old Buick and
right.
buy the old Buick and getting ready to go on a road trip, and then the alternator goes.
When I was in college, my sister and I from Oregon drove an '86 Ford Tempo from Oregon to Florida, and it was like a ticking time bomb the entire time. We did break down in Arkansas and had to have a repair there, but it was something. So I know a little something about what they're going through.
You're basically a pilgrim.
I'm basically a pilgrim. Yeah, basically 1-for-1 carryover on hardship and faith. It was all faith. Yeah. As I was sitting in the IHOP while my car was being repaired. So anyway, they have all of these repairs that need to be made. Now, there's kind of an interesting thing that takes place, because as they go to make their final departure, this is August 1620, both ships attempt to sail twice, but the Speedwell keeps leaking like a sieve, like to the point that they can't stop it. So they bring it back. And when they get it back to shore and they go to inspect it, they really can't find where it's leaking. They just know that it's leaking. So they're checking all these different things. The kind of going theory right now is that the Speedwell was sabotaged by either the crew or a combination of the crew and maybe some of the Pilgrims who didn't actually end up wanting to go. Because the reason we know this is that the Speedwell eventually is abandoned. Like it proves unseaworthy twice. It's leaking. It's sold later, and this is like separate lore. It's sold as a fishing vessel, and it works fine. What they determined was that it was overmast, and so the main sailing mast was too big and too heavy for the ship, and that the captain was sailing it too hard. Now, I don't know enough about sailboats to know what it means to sail the ship too hard. I don't even know how. There's no accelerator, right? so I mean, he's really grinding gears, but he's sailing it too hard apparently, and it's overmast. And the thought is that maybe he was doing it on purpose, because ultimately he decides, I don't really want to go over there. I don't want to sail this over. There is one interesting article that I read this past week was that maybe Because the Dutch had some holdings, some financial interest in some of like the fur trade that was going on early, that they didn't want that settlement to work out. And so they maybe hired the captain to kind of sabotage the ship. And it's that's something separately you can look into. Ultimately, they abandoned the Speedwell. Now, everybody and all of the cargo is being packed onto the Mayflower. And the Mayflower has to make this cross-Atlantic journey. Now, here's the thing. You think about times you've had a car breakdown or something like that, and the delay is just, it's killer. It's obnoxious. Now we have to leave the next day, or we're 2 days off from our trip. The Pilgrims lose 5 weeks dinking around with the Speedwell, trying to get it fixed, bringing it back to port, all of the work that's involved in that. In the meantime, everybody who is supposed to be sailing also has to survive. So they're eating from their supplies. They're selling things so that they can, get the ship repaired and all these different things. So their supply and their finances are dwindling over this 5 weeks. On top of that, they are losing the best sailing weather. So now when they go to depart, some of the congregation says, we don't want to go. This is an omen from God that we're now in a bad sailing season. It's been 5 weeks. We're taking all of these attempts. The Lord obviously does not want us to go. And so a bunch of them end up going back to Holland. Ultimately, what ends up on the Mayflower are 102 passengers and about 30 crewmen. So these 102 passengers, there are about 40 pilgrims, the Separatists, the Leiden congregation. And then, and these are guys, again, some key figures here. So like William Brewster, who is an elder and an assistant pastor. He's a big player in the new plantation. John Carver is their first governor. Becomes their first governor. William Bradford, of course, is the future governor after Carver. Miles Standish is an important player. He's kind of their military leader when they get over there. And then there's strangers. These are the non-separatists. There's about 60 to 65 of them. These are adventurers, laborers, craftsmen, servants, and other folks. They set sail. And the crossing is brutal. 66 days at sea. I wouldn't want to spend 66 days on a cruise ship, let alone in the Mayflower. It is tight. Disease is breaking out on the ship. All of the comforts of life are absent. There's no comfortable bed. There's no personal space. Water is limited and rationed, of course, because you have to have water survive. So you're not able to bathe and do all the things that you might want to do there. Several things happen as they're crossing. So one thing is a man named John Howland goes overboard. He's able to catch himself on some rigging, and they're able to actually pull him back in. But he came very, very close to being lost at sea. John Howland is one of the, he has a long lineage of rather famous Americans that have come from his loins that we would have lost if he would have died at sea. Like the Bush family, like George W. Bush and all the rest. John Smith, the Mormon, founder of Mormonism, which we'll talk about in our cults section, of course. He is a descendant of John Howland. So lots of implications just with one person that could have been lost at sea. Sickness again. At one point, the mast rigging broke, and they were at risk of losing the ship. The ship might capsize under the mast rigging breaking. And this is where the legend of the giant screw comes in. And no one's really sure what the giant screw was for. It may have been for a printing press or something like that, but the carpenter on board was able to take this giant screw and secure the mast rigging so that they could continue sailing. And again, if that wouldn't have been brought, who knows what would have happened. It wasn't all bad, though. There was a little baby born. And so you're thinking about this horrible sea crossing. What do you want to do? Let's throw a newborn into the mix, right? Like, we're already sleepless. Let's have a crying baby. Furthermore, imagine being like 8.5 months pregnant and like, I got an idea. How about I hop on this ship and cross the Atlantic?
Yeah, it's just crazy to me that she went. You know, you
Right,
think after all
exactly.
of this, you're like,
right. Yeah. Like,
I'll catch the next one.
Right. Yeah. You guys let me know. Send me a postcard. I'm going to, yeah. And so this little baby, Oceanus Hopkins is born on the ship. There's lots of other, one really fascinating story that Bradford tells is he doesn't say the man's name, but he refers to him as the mocking man. The mocking man is, I'll just read this for you. I had sent this to somebody else. I was talking to, I sent it to Jack. This is from Bradford's journal. He said there was a proud and very profane young man, one of the seamen, of a lusty, able body. You never hear anybody describe someone as lusty, do you?
Don't like that.
I don't like that at all. Yeah. Of a lusty, able body, which made him more haughty. He would always be contemning the poor people.
Quick question. Was it Hauty or HO?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
After lusty, I'm not so
right.
sure.
Lusty, able-bodied, and he was a haughty. And no, he would always be contemning the poor people, treating them with contempt in their sickness, and cursing them daily with grievous excretations, and did not let to tell them that he hoped to help cast half of them overboard before they came to their journey's end, and to make merry with what they had. And if he were by any gently reproved, he would curse and swear most bitterly. So you have this sailor that's like, I can't wait for you people to die. I will be the first one throwing you overboard. And then he would like swear at them and treat them bitterly. This is what Bradford said. But it pleased God, before they came half seas over, to smite this young man with a grievous disease, of which he died in a desperate manner, and so was himself the first that was thrown overboard. Thus his curses light on his own head, and it was an astonishment to all his fellows, for they noted it to be the just hand of God upon him.
Whew.
Yeah. So then all the other sailors became super congenial. Like, can we get you guys anything? Is there, so weirdly, with that journey, again, just with the intensity of it, only 2 people actually died. So there was that man, the mocking man, and then there was a man named William Button, who was a servant, and he died just before they got there. I mean, it was like a couple of days, I think. It might even have been the day before, which that's just the worst. If you're going to die at sea, let it be at day 1 or something like that,
Yeah.
So 66 days, they're crossing. Why do they go through all this? Why are they putting themselves through one hardship after another? Bradford says something really interesting. He says, a great hope and inward zeal they had of laying some good foundation, or at least to make some way thereunto, for propagating and advancing the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in those remote parts of the world. Yea, though they should be but even a stepping stone unto others for the performing of so great a work. Bradford and the rest of the Pilgrims took the position of, we are willing to be stepping stones so that those coming after us, we will be the foundation. We will be the ones trod upon. We will shoulder the hardship so that those that come after us can have a better life. That is wild.
It's remarkable. Who thinks like that now?
Right. Right. I mean, it's so, when you read again, I so encourage all the listeners to read Bradford's journal. It has been updated in modern English and all that good stuff. So if you want to chew on it a little better that way. Thankfully, they kept lusty in the description of the man, but but it's so convicting. It's so convicting because I think about my own life and how often I'm just put out by the mildest inconvenience, and yet these people are just, I mean, they just are grinding, truly willing to lay their lives down for something better. For something is freedom. And I wonder if I would have, in the face of all of this hardship, if I would have stood there on the shore, Speedwell has been tanked, and said, you know what? Maybe the Church of England doesn't look so bad after all. Like, would my convictions drive me to pursue what they do? Now, of course, I'd like to think that they do, but of course, you never know unless you're really in that circumstance. So, November 9th, 1620, land is sighted. They make it across. What a joyous experience this must have been for them to lay eyes on land after 66 days at sea. The Pilgrims see Cape Cod after roughly a 66 day journey. Cape Cod was not totally unknown. It was previously known to fishermen. It was a place that it was even named Cape Cod because at certain times of the year in the Cape, there was a certain kind of fish that would hang out there. Any guesses?
Trout.
Halibut? Right. Yeah. Oh God. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So they realize though pretty quickly that they're not where they're supposed to be. And so they try sailing south toward the Hudson River. Well, because they've left 5 weeks late, weather's already getting really, really bad. The ocean crossing took them longer than it was supposed to. They're trying to head south toward the Hudson River, and the weather literally will not permit it. They cannot go any further south. And prospects are not looking good because the weather's just getting worse and worse and worse because winter is beginning to set in. So all of these dangerous shoals that are like on the outside of Cape Cod there force them to turn back. So they turn back. They arrive at Cape Cod's harbor in November 11th, 1620. They drop anchor at what now is Provincetown. And so if you kind of look at a map, you can kind of see like the top of the horn there where Provincetown is now. They realize that they're kind of in trouble because they have a patent for near the Hudson River. Where they're at right now, they're not supposed to be there. They don't have permission to be there. Now, one of the things about a patent is when you get a land patent, you have permission to be there, but then you're also under the rule of law from the sending country. And so whether you're religious or unreligious, or whether you're wealthy or poor, the rule is established for you by virtue of the patent that you have. Finding themselves outside of the patent, though, they're going to have to settle a place where they're not supposed to be, and they need to be able to govern themselves. And this is where they write the Mayflower Compact. And I wish we had time to go into the Mayflower Compact, but for those of you who know, the Mayflower Compact is written and signed, and it establishes self-governance. And this is like the seedbed of so many things that you will see come to fruition in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. Because they're outside of their patent. I mean, this is like that they're agreeing the consent of the governed to be governed. That they're agreeing for fair and equal treatment, that they're looking at things like the purpose of government is for the good of the colony. Okay, which again, some of these things are kind of radical concepts, especially coming from a monarchy. They're just penning out this 2-paragraph kind of thing that's going to have so much impact later on. So a bunch of them sign it. They establish self-government. This is mid to late November 1620. They anchor and they set out on the first exploration. So they're at the top of the Horn of Cape Cod there. Multiple scouting parties go about, and they start finding all this evidence of Native Americans. They're finding corn cache, they're finding tools, they're finding footprints. One of the more interesting aspects, which again, time will not permit, is Corn Hill. They find like a buried cache of corn that is providential. If they would not have had that corn, they would not probably have survived. It's just plain and simple as that. And it was there for the taking, and we'll see why in a few moments, or hear why in a few moments. They have their first, the weather, well, I should say the weather's turning bitterly cold. After they find that corn cache at Corn Hill, what becomes known as Corn Hill, they dig it out, and this is bushels and bushels and bushels of corn. The ground freezes hard like 2 days afterwards. So if they would have been there a few days later, they would not have been able to get down and get into the corn where it was. So again, I mean, just providential thing after providential thing. Anyway, the weather is bitterly cold. The men are suffering from exposure. They continue moving down the Horn, and this is where they have what is known as the first encounter, December 6, 1620. A large scouting group is attacked by Nauset warriors. When they wake up, when the explorers wake up, there's arrows kind of like laying all around them. There's no casualties. The Pilgrims withdraw at the time, and there are several times where they see Indians and they try to make contact with them, but then the Indians kind of disappear back into the woods and things like that. December 16th and December 16th through the 20th. Oh, you have to remember that the Cape, the Horn, to get from Provincetown to Plymouth is like 77 miles. I mean, so it's a step. And my wife is from New England, and she tells me that, I didn't know this previously, that on the tip of the Horn, okay, where Provincetown is, that's the only place on the East Coast that you can watch the sunset over the water. So like us West Coasters, when we look out at the Pacific, we see the sun go down over the ocean. It's all beautiful and lovely. Apparently out on the Horn is the only place you can see it go down, because Cape Cod is so massive on the East Coast. Anyway, little fun fact, and you can fact check me on. Actually, no, you can fact check my wife on that, because she's the one that told me that as a native New Englander. Anyway, they have their first encounter. And December 16th, the Plymouth site is discovered. Now, what's really interesting is what they find at the Plymouth site is basically an abandoned village. That there's cleared fields, there's fresh water, but there's nobody around. And essentially they decide, well, this seems to be the best possible settlement location. So the Mayflower moves to Plymouth in late December. The ship sails across the bay. They take anchor in Plymouth Harbor, and the beginning of the construction of the settlement begins immediately. This is the beginnings of the first winter, what becomes known as the first winter. Disease and exposure absolutely devastates the Pilgrims. Roughly half of the 102 passengers die. At one point, the sickness is so bad that Branford says that only 6 or 7 people are healthy enough to care for the rest. So this is chopping wood, preparing food, bathing them, because the disease, the sickness that they had, I mean, people are immobile. They're not even going outside to use the bathroom. Branford says that in this whole time period, those 6 or 7 people never complained, and that God supernaturally preserved their health through the winter, that they could shoulder the load to care for those that remained. But again, half of the 102 passengers dying is crazy.
Yeah.
And you think about why God allows things, and we can't speak maybe too deeply to this, but it is a fact of the matter. that they would have, and I think Branford mentions this later, that if those half did not die, then none of them would have survived because they would have starved to death. Like
Yeah.
there wasn't enough food and there wasn't enough supply. And so it's just one of those horrifying realities of what they experience, to again have religious freedom, which is something that for most of us isn't even on our radar. Like I don't wake up every day thinking about, like religious freedom and the implications of those things. And yet this was such a driving factor for these folks that they were willing to, withstand the worst of the worst.
Huh.
So they survived the first winter, about half of them. And again, there's children that lose their parents. There's whole households where only one person remains. I mean, it's horrifying. March 16th, spring rolls around. 1621. Shocking event of shocking events. A near naked Indian walks into the settlement in the middle of the day and says, "Welcome, Englishmen." This is Samosoit. Samosoit establishes the first friendly contact with the Pilgrims. They've survived the winter. They haven't had any real contact with any Indians up to this point. And so now this nearly naked man walks into their settlement and he speaks English. They must have thought that they were hallucinating or something. Samosoit learned to speak English from fishermen. So it's very broken. It's very difficult. But he makes mention that there's another native that speaks better English than he does. And his name is Squanto, and he'll go and get Squanto. So on March 22nd, 1621, Massasoit, who is the chief of the kind of tribal confederation in that area, Massasoit and Squanto come and they have really their first meeting with the Pilgrims. And again, there's so many things involved in this because ultimately what comes out of this is an agreement. They form a pact together, Massasoit and the Pilgrims, for mutual defense and a peace treaty. Okay. And this treaty that they have lasts for like 50 years. And there's several things involved with this. Mutual protection. If you need help, we will come to your protection. If we need help, you'll come to our protection. They committed to peaceful relationships, which looked like property protection. As an act of good faith, some of Massasoit's warriors then kind of came out of the woods with a bunch of tools that they had stolen from the Pilgrims over the winter. Like, hey, we found these, give them back, kind of things. At one point, Bradford had said that in the winter he went out to chop firewood, left his axe out there, came back to the settlement to grab something, went back to get his tools, and all of his tools were gone. So they walked off into the woods. But so they had promised property protection, so they weren't going to rob each other's crops, they weren't going to steal tools or do anything like that. They also, and I thought this was very interesting, that should there be a violation by either party, a tribesman or a member of the plantation, that they together would come to an agreement on how the person should be punished or disciplined. And so one side wasn't able to take justice into their own hands. This comes into play later because there are some instances where there's some crop stealing and things like that. And to keep from a war erupting, they come together and they agree on a punishment. And then also just shared assistance. If you need not just protection in battle, but if you need help, we'll help the best we can, and vice versa. So Squanto is the interpreter between the Pilgrims and Massasoit. Squanto has a whole interesting story in of himself. Squanto is basically lured under false pretenses as a young man onto a Spanish vessel, I think. I think it's a Spanish vessel. Under the pretenses of trade. Well, it turns out he and a couple of other guys get kidnapped. They're sold as slave in Spain. Squanto, through a series of events, makes it down to England and then makes it all the way back home again. So in this time period, he has learned English very well. When he comes back, he finds that his people in his village has been decimated by disease to the point that no one is remaining. And that is why they found Plymouth, what becomes known as Plymouth, to be abandoned. Squanto is invaluable to the Pilgrims. I mean, not only is he their connection as far as translation and things like that go, but he teaches them planting techniques. He teaches them fishing. He teaches them navigation. He gives them vital information about tribes that are friendly and not friendly, and how to handle different kind of folks that way. Again, providentially, you think about, if it is very likely historically that if the Pilgrims would have landed in the Hudson River area where they were planning initially to land, they probably would have been slaughtered by the Massachusetts Indians. Because later on, they prove themselves to be violent. And this is one of the things that, Squanto informs them. So even the act of being blown where they weren't supposed to be, it was just a providential act by God. So they kind of get their training, if you will, in the spring and summer of 1621. Squanto, again, helps them with their planting technique. Some of the seeds that they had brought from England, they found did not plant and grow well, and they did not thrive here in the New World. But teaching them planting things like corn, this is kind of classically, Squanto teaches them the fish technique of planting with fish parts, fish heads, and things like that for fertilizer. He teaches them foraging, and so they eat a lot of mussels and clams, and what nuts and berries and things that they can eat are all made known. So again, Squanto is so valuable to the Pilgrims, again, providentially. Houses and palisades are finally completed that year, that summer and spring, or spring and summer. Crops grow successfully. So this is a time of celebration. Fall, 1621. They've survived they've survived everything up to this point. The crossing, they survived the first winter. They have peaceful relationships with the natives around them. They're secure. Their crops are growing. The harvest is looking like they're going to survive the winter, and that they finally have their feet underneath them. And this is where the first Thanksgiving comes into play. After their first successful harvest, the Pilgrims hold a 3-day feast. Now, one of the ironic things about the Pilgrims is that the Separatists, like any good Puritan, hated holidays. Holidays are Catholic. Holidays are man-made. Holidays are not good. In fact, you get 52 holy days a year, and it's called the Lord's Day. That's all you need. That's
Amen.
that's kind of the attitude. Jack says, "Amen." He's wearing a Christmas hat. No.
I actually do have a Christmas tree right there.
Because I've been working on my Christmas list. And so it's ironic that we celebrate Thanksgiving every year, because the Pilgrims have been like, I hate this so much. But what they did celebrate feast days and days of contrition, like fasting days, like days of prayer and fasting, because they've seen that as there's biblical principle for feasts and for days of fasting and things like that. So they have this 3-day feast. There's a little bit of confusion about how all of the parties came together. Some historians say that the Massasoit and his warriors were invited. Others say that the celebration, already the Pilgrims were being good Americans and in celebration shooting guns off, and that the Massasoit thought, oh, they must be in a battle, let's go help them. And then they kind of show up and they're like, oh, you guys are having a party? How come you didn't invite us? Kind of thing. So there's a little bit of confusion historically, and maybe a listener has some better insight on this than I do. Ultimately, what happens is the Pilgrims are having their feast. Massasoit shows up, and he brings 90 men with him. Okay, so you talk about extra guests at dinner, but they did not come unprepared. As a contribution to the feast, Massasoit and his men brought 5 deer with them, which is, that's a good day hunt. As a hunter, that's a good day hunting. That's good. There's a lot of talk about what constituted that first Thanksgiving feast. Some of the things that are mentioned in the historical records was, of course, there was the deer that Massasoit and his men brought. Fowl, which could be a lot of things. Fowl could be turkeys, ducks, geese, swans. They would eat swans. Fish, clams, maybe even lobsters. Of course, cornmeal would have been involved into making some kind of mush or porridge thing. I mean, I'm sorry, if I'm going to the first Thanksgiving and there's lobster available or there's mush available, double
taking
the
the lobster roll.
lobster.
Yeah.
I wonder if it really hit them then that they shouldn't have sold the butter in England.
This is a really bad lobster.
We are
roll.
absolutely choking down this lobster. Right. Anyway. So there's this celebration. It's a celebration of survival and gratitude and peace and provision. I mean, all of the things that should cause us to celebrate.
Yeah.
When we come together this week, hopefully family, friends, church family, whatever the case is for you, think about the things that led up to this holiday, and don't let it escape you that it is a time of thankful remembrance. One of the great crimes in Romans chapter 1 is that God was made apparent to these individuals, and they did not glorify him, and they refused to give him thanks. And that sin of refusing to be thankful led way to so many cascading other sins that we see in Romans 1. So be thankful this year.
Yeah.
Praise God for where he has us. Are we a perfect country? Absolutely not. But things are so good, so good.
Amen.
And
Yeah.
we have so much to be thankful for. I mean, I think even in the context of, Jack and I, as a Baptist and Presbyterians, and Grayson being here in spirit with us, in all of his Baptistness, that we're even friends and talking about these things and all that. It's just glory to God. Glory to God. I should say this one last thing. This is bonus content. Before, okay, wait. So they have this feast, but nobody's like celebrating Thanksgiving. They don't say like the next year, like, hey guys, let's have our Thanksgiving feast. It isn't until 1863 that Thanksgiving, so like again, 100 years later, 140 years later, that Thanksgiving becomes an official holiday. And it becomes an official holiday under Abraham Lincoln, as a way to hopefully kind of unite the nation during the Civil War, a day of peace and remembrance and thankfulness and all of those sorts of things. So Thanksgiving as we know it begun with Abraham Lincoln. The date was changed a few times. FDR moved it to like the third Thursday because it made for more shopping time. It was supposed to like boost the economy. And then in World War II, Congress moved it to the fourth Thursday. So anyway, I feel like we ended on a really good spiritual note, and then I started rambling about why. Disregard everything I just said about FDR and Congress and Abraham Lincoln. So that, friends, is the true story of Thanksgiving.
Blake,
What?
I was with you all the way. All right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
from Henry VIII, all the way down.
Yep.
I'm like lockstep, buddy. But when we got to the meal, I've got a little bit of a different take on it because I've heard a little bit of a new. I mean, it's probably true, like the deer or whatever.
Yeah.
But there is a turkey, right?
Oh,
Do you know the story of the turkey?
I guess not.
Well, you've been talking a while. Why don't you take a drink? Let me just listen to this is my turkey story. Because I think this is where the turkey
This is the
comes
real
from.
Thanksgiving. This is the Thanksgiving they don't teach you about in the textbooks. Welcome to Jack Lee Radio.
On the edge of the wild, where the autumn wind rattled bare branches and turned the fields to gold, the little Puritan settlement was finally breathing easier. They had survived a cruel winter and an even leaner spring. Too many graves dotted the hill behind the meeting house, yet this season, the harvest was real, and for the first time, hope smelled like fresh bread and roasted squash. They planned a day of Thanksgiving, so mothers kneaded dough and children darted between the rough-hewn houses while the elders spoke of what they could do to celebrate and dedicate an entire day for worship, fellowship, Thanksgiving, and of course a shared meal. But while all this busyness and planning was happening, no one knew what waited for them in the woods. Little Nathaniel Pemberley was the first to see it. He had chased a squirrel farther than he should have, boots crunching through leaves, his wooden practice sword bouncing at his side, when suddenly the forest grew unnaturally still, and he heard it. A low, throbbing gobble, rolling through the trees like a distant thunder. The ground trembled beneath his feet as something impossibly large moved among the trees. It stepped into view, a turkey, a twisted and grotesque, towering above the treetops. Its feathers were dark and oily, swallowing the light, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow as they looked at Nathaniel. Not the dull bead of a bird, but a focused, hateful stare. The wattle beneath its beak pulsed like a living coal. The great beast let out a shrieking gobble that clawed at Nathaniel's nerves, and he did the only thing he knew. He ran. And by the time he burst into the clearing back at the settlement, he could hardly breathe. A giant turkey, he gasped, clinging to his father's coat. Bigger! It's bigger than the meeting house. It shook the ground. His father, John Pemberley, knelt to steady the young lad, while other men gathered around, hands on their muskets, eyes scanning the tree line. And before anyone could dismiss the story, the ground shook and shivered again. Dust sifted from the rafters, and far off in the woods, they all heard that horrible gobble echoing over the trees, and no one dared doubt Nathaniel. They assembled in the meeting house. Stern-faced men, weary mothers, elders with Bibles, and their settlement's pastor, Simeon, standing at the front. Nathaniel retold what he had seen, and when he finished, a heavy silence fell. Pastor Simeon scanned the room, looking from face to face. And he spoke. "We came here to worship in peace," he said quietly. "If something has risen up to mock and threaten that, we will not simply wait for it to come crashing through our doors and destroy what we have." So that night the men readied themselves with muskets, axes, and what little armor they had. There was no boasting, only the sound of the clink of powder horns and buckles as they prepared for battle. And before they left and set off into the woods, Pastor Simeon called them to kneel. "Brothers," he said in a voice low but steady, "tonight we stand for our families, our homes, our faith.
We know our weaknesses, we know our limits, but we also know what must be done and what must be protected. They bowed their heads, they prayed, gave glory to God, and then they rose and followed the sound into the dark. The demon turkey was not hiding. Its mocking gobble rolled through the forest and the earth, giving a faint shudder with every step it took. And in moonlight, they finally saw it, fully in a clearing. Feathers flared like a dreadful cloak, beak dripping with dark saliva, breath steaming in the cold. It shrieked, a warped gobble that seemed to carry every dark, sad memory of hunger, cold, and fear they'd endured in recent times. Some men flinched, hands gripped white-knuckled on their muskets. But Pastor Simeon stepped forward, not with a weapon, but with a voice. This ground belongs to no monster. It belongs to us. We will not yield our homes. We will not surrender our gathering. We stand together, and tonight we fight.
In response, the creature lowered its massive head and charged. The first volley roared. Gunshots cracked through the night. Muzzle flashes lit the trees, and bullets tore through feathers and the twisted flesh. After time and continued battle, the turkey staggered, but fought back. It lashed out with its wings. Wind slammed into the men like a storm. Trees splintered. Bodies were flung aside, and for a moment, there was a clearing in the chaos. But pinned beneath a fallen branch, Pastor Simeon struggled to get free. And after realizing he couldn't, he did the only thing he knew. He began to sing. A simple hymn, old words and strong melody. One voice quickly became two, and then three, and then four, and even as they reloaded with shaking hands, the men shouted the lines of the hymn between powder and shot. Their rough hymn rose higher than the monster's screams as they gave glory to God with every trembling note. The demon bird reeled back. Its movements faltered, as if those defiant voices, worship instead of panic, confused and enraged it. In its confusion, John Pemberley saw a chance. The beast's head dipped low, exposing the glowing, pulsing wattle at the base of its throat. John quickly dropped to one knee, braced his musket against a fallen log. He thought of Nathaniel, he thought of his wife, the little meeting house. And then he fired. The shot flew true. The bullet struck the pulsing knot beneath the beak. And for an instant, the clearing blazed with a harsh inner light, as if something deep inside the creature had been shattered. The turkey screamed, it thrashed, it tore up the earth and trees as it gallivanted about, and finally crashed to the ground with a deafening thud. Silence. Branches creaked. Someone coughed. And among all the dust, a voice said, "We're still here." And then slowly, laughter and joy rippled across the clearing. These men refused to let terror have the last word. And by lantern light, they worked through the evening, axes and knives, turning their fallen enemy into meat. What had come to trample their homes and silence their worship was dragged, piece by stubborn piece, back toward the settlement. Soon, smoke curled over the chimneys as fires were stoked hot. The women stared at the sheer amount of meat and then set to work washing, seasoning, and roasting. Children carried wood and water, pointing at the massive slabs of turkey with a mix of fear and delight. And by morning, the whole settlement smelled of roasting victory.
Bruised and bandaged, the men limped into the square. Tables and boards were piled high with bread and stews, and of course, vast platters of the carved demon turkey. The graves on the hill behind the settlement still stood. The winter scars still lingered. But today, they were together. Pastor Simeon looked over the scene, smoke in the cold air, flushed faces, children laughing again, and exhausted, he managed to smile. Let it be a feast, not just for our hunger, but for our hearts. They bowed low, they gave glory to God for the strange hard-won mercy and victory of the night, and then they ate, deeply, joyfully, and gratefully.
So that's what I remember from the first Thanksgiving.
That does sound vaguely familiar.
Do you? Oh, yeah. Okay. You just left that part out, so I felt like I should, let people know.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. This has been Blake and a little bit of Jack with the chorus and the chaos. Until next time.